I'd like to talk now about your spiritual experiences. You mentioned earlier about your own mystical experiences, and I'd like you to tell me a little bit about what they have been.
When I was a child, um, I would go on long walks and talk with God, uh, talk about what was going on, what was challenging to me, what I needed to work out. And in these talks, very often, sometimes they were just clearing, and then sometimes I'd come away from them with insights. It was a sort of a meditative practice. When I went through some difficulties within the church that I was raised in, mostly because of asking questions, I entered into what I call my agnostic phase. And basically it was just this feeling that we couldn't know. And if we couldn't know, then that was enough of an answer. And so within that, I moved in, I attended the Unitarian Church with a lot of people who were agnostic to atheist. And that didn't feed me spiritually, but I didn't realize that. And later I went along, I no longer had my talks with God, but I went along looking for meaning. I started studying astrology, and in the process of studying astrology, began to see an overlying order and ways that we could gain insights into the order of the universe, into the order of our lives, a sense of purpose. Within the studies that I did in astrology, I began to see a possibility that reincarnation was true. And ultimately I became a professional astrologer and was asked to office with a group of other people who were starting an organization called the Foundation for Metaphysical Studies, and officed there. And the astrologer who brought me in had also been a Methodist minister, and he started the Church of Higher Consciousness. And he asked me to become ordained and become an associate pastor there. And so I did. And in this process, within this organization of the Foundation for Metaphysical Studies, there were people who were teaching all sorts of alternative spiritual experiences, spiritual development, psychic development, numerology, Kabbalah, and we got to spend time together and talk and take each other's courses. And I went through this 2-year period of a radical expansion of my understanding of arcane thought and alternative spirituality. I also had a number of experiences with past life experience, personal experiences of the spiritual through a meditative practice and so on. And you come to a point where it's no longer a matter of faith or hope. You have experience. If you have a past life experience, if you go back and experience a previous incarnation and have it resonate through every cell of your being, this is no longer just a thought thing. It becomes knowledge. It becomes experience. And this gives you a confidence for moving forward. And I've always had this orientation toward a scientific approach, an objective testing approach, a scientific approach to non-scientific subjects. The problem with science is that it can only establish truth that can be objective, where your experience can be duplicated by someone else. The problem is that rules out all subjective truth. You can't objectively allow someone else to have that experience. You can tell them how you got there, but they'll go there and they'll have their own personal experience. And yet it is real and it is truth. The example that I use to discuss, to show this, is love. If you have ever been in love with someone deeply and strongly, it changes you, and it's a whole other experience, and it is real to the core of your being. And yet you can't in any way share that experience with anyone else. You can tell them what it's like for you, but it's a purely subjective truth. And yet there are almost none that are more moving or more fundamental. But there's no way, you go, okay, how do you know you're in love? Prove to me that you're in love. Prove to me that love exists. But when you've had that experience, whatever it is, whether it's a mystical experience of the sacred or a personal sense of awe at a forest sunrise, it changes you. And then you go looking for the meaning in that. But that meaning is truly personal. But my understanding is that the core of every religion is someone who had that personal mystical experience. Jesus, Buddha, were not teaching anyone else's doctrine. They were discovering and sharing their own. And that's been my mystical path to mine. It's fairly eclectic. It borrows, its foundation lays in Christianity, in Eastern thought, in Theosophism, in shamanism. But it is personal, and it's an amalgam of those on which I've had my experiences.
How would you say you have integrated? What has your process of integration been of all this information and experience?
I've two questions that happen everywhere and with anything that comes into my life. You've heard me talk about them. Why is this in my life? And is it mine? When something occurs, my first question is, what's up with this? Why is this occurring? Is it occurring for me to put something together? Is it occurring because my perspective needs adjustment? Is it occurring because it's time for me to change? And then it's been my experience, if it's something traumatic or if it's something difficult, when I get the answer to that question, when I integrate this experience, it either goes away or it ceases to be traumatic. It becomes integrated. It becomes part, and it's not disruptive anymore. Mm-hmm. I believe that I believe that life is this marvelous conspiracy between our soul and the infinite, to bring into our lives those things which move us toward who we're here to be. It can move us toward it through being a lesson to show us we're off track, or the consequence of some earlier decision or action. But if we attend to it, if we live our life in consciousness, recognizing that everything that's before us that gains our attention is for a purpose. It's a symbol to be read and integrated. It's a lesson. Or it may simply be an experience of beauty to be appreciated. But when we give it the attention that is its due, it becomes a part of us.
Have you ever had any difficulties integrating your experiences?
Sure. Yes. I think that as we grow, we become a quicker study if we are oriented toward growth. There's a wonderful concept in Japan called, I believe it's called Kaizen, which is constant and never-ending improvement. And the idea is you can always tweak. And it's a wonderful idea. We tend to work in plateaus in the West. We get things right and then we don't want to move. But if we're constantly, this idea of constant and never-ending improvement, I think, is really sort of how the universe works and how we work. And if we're oriented toward that, then we roll with the lessons and with the required improvement. When we fight against it, we require that it grow to a point to demand change before integrating it. And those are the dramas of my youth, where I could take 5 or 6 years to get a lesson, working in a career that wasn't right, or being in a relationship that was not going to take either of us where we were here to go. The image that I really like for life is surfing. There is this wave that exists, and our ability to recognize what it is and to experience it as what it is with our greatest ability to ride it is that process of integration. And when we're oriented toward that, the lessons come quickly. Very often we don't even have to bring them all the way in. They'll happen out there. And we go, oh, I don't want that in here. I think I'll change so that that doesn't come to me. But it's this thing that there is nothing separate from the spiritual.
What support do you require when you are processing an experience?
Someone to talk to who I don't know if require. It's particularly helpful to me to have someone who I can talk to at the level at which I'm trying to process it. Very often all I need them to do is listen, because as the stuff comes out of my mouth, will catch myself holding forth on something and going, that's not true. Because I gain the insight as it's coming out. But the ability to talk and dialogue, people whose wisdom I trust, where I can go and say, I'm dealing with this, what are your thoughts? And very often, to have that, I've had that talking with you. You've been really helpful to me a number of times. Sometimes it was exactly what you said, which was what I needed to put together. Other times it was just our conversation leading me through to where I needed to do it. And again, this thing with connection. I had never realized how much connection feeds me. Largely because I had not done it on the scale that I seem to be doing it now. It had been close, my wife, my family, but I like it larger.
Tell me a little bit about the qualities of connection that you find so meaningful and helpful.
I believe that we travel in packs through our incarnations, and we arrive here with contracts to be in a person's life at a particular time. And through being who we are, saying what is our honest expression of ourselves, being something that they need at that time. Sometimes we're there to be a schmuck. I mean, I have watched people be difficult people in my lives. In my life, I have been a difficult person in people's lives at a time when that took them through the tests that they needed that could lay the foundation for who they were there to be. And I think we have these contracts with each other. I'm less proud of certain things I've provided for some people than for others. But the levels at which we're connected sometimes are so incredibly subtle, they're completely outside of consciousness. And then we get the benefits of the ones where we can see the connections, or at least portions of it. And therein lies friendship, communication, and communion even with those people with whom we're truly deeply and at multiple levels connected.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add that you think people might find helpful about experiences that may not be earth-shattering, but are profoundly life-changing?
Everything in life can be a spiritual experience. Everything in life is a spiritual experience. The question is, can you put yourself in a position and in a perspective to experience it as one? If you consider that the person who cuts you off and slows you down on the freeway may be moving you out of the path of an accident and may be an angel saving you from something. If you operate on the idea that the universe works and that your best place in it is like a little riverboat pilot trying to read the best way to traverse it, but trusting to its wisdom and trusting to its currents, life becomes so much simpler. And there's a peace and contentment that comes with that I don't know another way to achieve.
Thank you, Pat.
My pleasure.
All right.